yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
My name is Jack Weinstein. I was born in Wichita, Kansas, and brought up in Brooklyn in the Bensonhurst section. When December 7th turned up, we were, of course, shocked, and 3 of my buddies and I walked around our neighborhood discussing it. I decided that I would enlist immediately. And I wanted to enlist in the Navy. I was told then that if I could graduate by August of that year, I would be able to get a commission and go to the naval school then at Columbia, the so-called 90-day wonder school. And I chose radar, which meant that I was sent to Cambridge to study first at Harvard and then at MIT. The question of what I would do thereafter was somewhat troubling because, again, there was a fairly wide choice. I chose submarines. The advantage of submarine service is that generally it's an all-or-nothing affair. Either you come back or you don't. So I was trained then at New London for a number of months, then took some additional training in submarine radar and flew out to the West Coast. I went out to Midway, servicing for a month or two submarines and getting some additional training. And then I picked up my submarine, the Jaleo 368, and immediately was put to work, particularly on the electronic equipment. The first night out, the first day I arrived on the ship, although we call the submarines boats, we were out for night training, and the submarine was taking bearings on the target ship when all of the electronics went out. And the captain turned to me and he said, "Jack, what are you going to do about this?" And I fixed it, was able to fix it immediately using techniques which I learned in the naval school and schools, and which I use every day in my work as a judge. The analysis of excluding various possibilities and then deciding what is the highly probable problem and then correcting it. We loaded torpedoes at Midway and topped off fuel and food and water, and headed for the Philippines. Our first engagement was in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. We were assigned to cut off the retreat of the Japanese fleet after its attack on the American landing in the Philippines was aborted. Our radar was exceptionally good, and we picked up a cruiser at a very long distance, exceptionally long for the radar of that time, I guess 32,000 yards. And we tracked it, and I was able to tell that it was either a cruiser or a large destroyer, and we sunk it. For that, I was awarded a letter of commendation from ComSub Pac, the admiral in charge of submarines in the Pacific. One of the striking incidents of the war for me was our last patrol. They had developed equipment, and this equipment was exceptionally good, which was a form of short-range, short-cycle sound equipment, much like short-cycle radar, so that using it, you could actually get a picture of where the mines were on a tube. And the Japanese had mined completely across to Korea, the Japanese Sea, so that it could keep its connection between the mainland free of any submarines. We were able to get through that by using this special sound equipment, which was very scary because you could feel some of these chains along the side, and you could see these things, and it was frightening to go through that way. While we're in the Japanese Sea, our orders were to patrol off the Russian coast. The Russians had agreed with Truman to come in to the war about August 13th or 14th, as I recall. And we were ordered to clear the coast by the 13th at the latest, because then the Russians would be attacking the Japanese in Manchuria. The first bomb was dropped, I believe it was August 6th, 1945. That was Little Boy. We were not far from it, but we weren't aware of it. I was on the bridge when we got notification from Hawaii of what had happened, and I turned to the assistant and said, Guy, they just dropped an atomic bomb. Is that going to mean that the atomic explosion will expand and we'll be wiped out? And he smiled, and we both laughed when he said no, because we're still talking about it. If we keep talking, then the world will go on. The Russians, however, recognizing, particularly after Fat Man was dropped on August 9th, that the Japanese would have to surrender, decided to come in early. And so they immediately declared war on Japan. That had great implications, because it meant that they immediately invaded Manchuria and were able to help the Chinese communists in their ultimate conquest of China. August 10th, I was 24 years old. So this was happening on my 24th birthday. And at August 14th, just a few days later, we were informed at 6 p.m., I think that the war was over. During that period in the Japanese Sea, we sank what I thought was the last merchant ship of the war. It was a large merchant ship which could obviously carry a great many passengers coming from the Korean side to Japan. And when we were maneuvering to sink it, I said to the captain, "Captain, the war is going to be over in a couple of days. It's clear. Why do we have to kill those people?" And he turned to me and he said, "Jack, you're right, but I have my orders. We're going to sink it." I thought that was the last ship, and I've always had it on my mind that we may have needlessly killed hundreds of people. Just last year, I met somebody who knew a man who was on another submarine in the group that was in the sea there, the Stickleback. And I was informed that the Stickleback came on the lifeboats from that ship and actually towed, because by that time there had been peace declared, towed the lifeboat into the nearest Japanese port, and that only one person had been killed on that ship. The person on the lookout, who when the ship shuttered was thrown to the deck. So that was a kind of a great relief to me. I've always thought that it was such an unnecessary killing. We killed so many people, but we should not have killed any more than was absolutely necessary. It was a strange period of our history. We pulled together and won the war, not so much because of our superiority as people or even as technicians, but because of our overwhelming superiority in materiel. We just overwhelmed the Japanese and, of course, the Germans in the amount of material we had in our training. And partly because of the nature of our people. I think that was our last great war. And I was proud and honored to have a part in it, because I do think that had we not participated and won that war, we would be faced now with dictatorships and horrors all over the world, much worse than those we can now visualize.
My name is Gil Blum. On December 7th, 1941, I was 15 and a half years old when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, bringing us into World War II. I forged my birth certificate so that the 7 for July became a 1, and I tried to enlist in the Marines so that I can get in at age 17. Only the Marines and the Navy took you at age 17. That was when the person at the Marine recruiting office gave me a booklet to look at with dots and asked me to read the number. I said about 2,000. He said, "You're colorblind. We won't take you." It's the first time I knew that I was colorblind. So I went to the Navy. I always knew I had a lazy eye, but I saw perfectly. And when they examined both my eyes, of course I only read the large letter with my left eye, and they said, "You have a lazy eye, we won't take you." So I then went and enlisted in the Army Reserve. The Army only took people at age 18, but if things got desperate, of course, they would take you younger if you were in the reserve. Being in the reserve brought me into the Army about 4 months earlier than those people who were being drafted, who were the same age as I. I went into the Army 1 month after my 18th birthday. I went to Fort Dix. I had to get there on my own because I was an enlistee. And after being there for about 2 days, I was sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where they have the armored training. The first vehicle that I ever drove in my life was a 30-ton Sherman tank. Never drove any other vehicle before that. After 5 months of training in Kentucky, I went home on furlough and then was sent overseas. I went overseas on the Mauritania II. It was the 370th voyage of that ship. It went to Greenock, Scotland. We arrived there at night. They put us on a train. We went right down to Southampton in the lower part of England, put us right on a ship, and right across the channel to Le Havre. They then put us on 40 and 8s, which are boxcars, and we were on our way to Liège, Belgium. There, they dispersed us further. My group went to Aachen. Aachen, Germany is right on the border with Belgium and the Netherlands. And that's where I joined my troop, which was in the 4th Cavalry, 24th Squadron, Reconnaissance. F Troop, which had 5 tanks. They had fought from D-Day all the way up to this point in old World War I tanks, which only had 4 men. Now they had a new tank, which was called the Chaffee, M24 Chaffee. We had trained in that at Fort Knox. They needed a cannoneer, the person who loads the cannon. And that's what we became. 4 of us who went overseas together and were close friends from basic training raised our hand when the captain said we need 5 people for the 3rd platoon. We all raised our hand, and he said we need 1 more. Somebody else said, okay, I'll go with you. He was like 4 years older than we, so he was like 22 years old. It did not matter, because when we got there, the lieutenant said, I only need 4 of you. Because one of the people who had been hurt had returned directly to the platoon rather than going to headquarters. Well, we all looked at this fellow who joined last, and he said, oh no, I'm not going back. It's unlucky to go back. So the lieutenant took out a deck of cards and he said, okay, we'll cut. And somebody drew a queen, I drew a 10, somebody else an 8, and one of my friends, Peter Boddy from the Bronx, drew a 3. And when this guy came up, he drew a 2. So the 4 of us were together in the 3rd platoon. 3 weeks later, we heard he got killed in an artillery attack. You might say he got killed by drawing that too. We fought our way to the Rhine River, and at the Rhine, all the bridges were down, except later we discovered that one was half down, about 30 miles below us at Remagen. But the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, during the night, you could hear them working, and all you could see is smoke, and you heard some gunfire because we saw the Germans on the other side. But when I woke up in the morning, believe it or not, there was a pontoon bridge. And that's what we crossed on. 3 tanks at a time. 1 tank getting off, 1 in the middle, and 1 about to get on. The Germans had retreated. We fought from town to town. At one particular town, we were fighting, and I was the cannoneer who was loading the cannon, and I had